Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Tony sighed as he closed the browser window on his computer. He had been browsing wedding dresses online again, imagining how the luxurious fabrics would feel against his skin. Ever since he was young, Tony had felt most at home in women's clothing. He loved the softness of skirts swishing around his legs, the gentle embrace of a padded bra. Dressing this way made him feel beautiful and free, able to embrace a part of himself that he kept hidden from the outside world. As an adult, Tony indulged his fondness for cross-dressing only in the privacy of his small apartment. He had amassed a collection of dresses, lingerie, wigs, and makeup that he stored carefully in the back of his closet. At night, he would take out an outfit and spend hours transforming himself, losing himself in the ritual of shaving his body hair, applying cosmetics, and finally donning the clothes that allowed him to see his true self gazing back in the mirror. It was a secret ritual that brought him comfort, but also loneliness. He wished he had someone to share this side of himself with, someone who would understand this part of him that he kept so well hidden. Tony had tried dating women before, but it never worked out in the long run. He could never bring himself to reveal this part of himself, fearing disgust and rejection. So his relationships would be built on a pretense, Tony always holding back a crucial piece of who he was. He was tired of living a double life, tired of pretending, but the fear of losing everything was too great. With a click of his mouse, Tony closed the page displaying wedding dresses and stood up with a stretch. He had to get ready for his job at the accounting firm, putting on the standard uniform of suit and tie like all the other men. He took one last lingering look at the muted rainbow of dresses before heading for the shower. At work, Tony found it hard to concentrate, his mind wandering back to the dresses that had filled his computer screen. He almost wished that he had the courage to come to work dressed that way, to finally live as his true self, but it was an impossible fantasy. "You okay there, Tony?" asked Lance from the next cubicle over. "You seem kind of spaced out." Tony shook himself out of his reverie. "Oh yeah, sorry. Just tired, I guess." Lance nodded. "Well, hang in there. Only a few more hours to go." Tony managed a weak smile in response. He rubbed his eyes, smoothing his hair back down from where it had become disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. Finally, it was 5 o'clock. As Tony packed up his things to head home, Lance poked his head over the cubicle wall again. "Me and a few others are going to grab some drinks. Want to come?" he asked. Tony hesitated. He knew he should go, should socialize more with his co-workers. But the thought of spending more time pretending to be someone he wasn't exhausted him. "Thanks for the invite, but I am pretty beat. Gonna head home," Tony replied. "No problem. Get some rest," Lance said easily, giving Tony a wave before heading out. Tony waited for the office to clear out before making his own exit. Outside, he took a deep breath, relieved to be free of the confines of the accounting firm and his role there. He stopped at the grocery store on the way home to pick up some microwavable meals. He planned on having a relaxing night at home. As he walked down the frozen foods aisle, his eyes were drawn to a magazine rack displaying bridal magazines. Tony found himself stopping, his fingers reaching out to gently stroke the glossy covers showcasing radiant brides in intricate gowns. He wished he could experience that just once, to feel beautiful and celebrated in a dress made just for him. With a small sigh, Tony forced himself to turn away and continue his shopping. At home, he ate his microwaved dinner while flipping through the newspaper. He always checked the classifieds, though he wasn't sure what he hoped to find there. His eyes skimmed past ads for used cars, job openings, even one for a used paddle boat. Then he saw it. The ad was small, just a few lines wedged between one for a room for rent and another selling a piano, but it made Tony catch his breath. "For sale, wedding dress veil, crinoline, size 6. Elegant embroidered gown with train, only worn once, $350, call Sherry 555, 2938. Tony's pulse quickened with excitement as he reread the ad, making sure he hadn't imagined it. A wedding dress and accessories, just waiting for someone to give them new life. On impulse, before he could overthink it, Tony grabbed his cell phone and dialed the number listed. After 3 rings, a woman answered. "Hello?" "Hi, I'm calling about the ad for the wedding dress for sale," Tony said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Oh, yes. Are you interested in seeing it?" the woman asked. She introduced herself as Cherie. They made arrangements to meet at Cherie's house so Tony could try on the dress. He hesitated when she gave her address. She lived all the way across town in a neighborhood he wasn't familiar with. But his longing to wear the beautiful dress overcame his apprehension. The next evening, Tony showered and shaved his legs before driving over to Sherry's place. He had considered dressing up femininely, but didn't want to presume anything or make Sherry uncomfortable. He arrived outside a small, tidy bungalow, double-checking the address before walking up and ringing the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened, revealing a woman who looked to be in her mid-30s. She had kind eyes and a friendly smile. "You must be Tony," she said. "Come on in." Tony stepped inside, looking around the cozy home. His eyes were immediately drawn to the furnishings, which had a distinctly feminine aesthetic. The sofa and armchairs were upholstered in soft floral patterns. Display shelves held decorative plates and vases of fake flowers. Framed cross-stitch wall hangings gave comforting adages like, "Home is where the heart is." "The dress is in my bedroom. We can try it on in there where there's more space," Sherry explained, leading the way down a hall decorated with wallpaper printed with roses. Tony followed her into the bedroom, which was just as womanly as the rest of the house. The bed was canopied in gauzy pink fabric. Lacy curtains filtered the afternoon sunlight. A vanity table held a glittering collection of jewelry boxes, perfume bottles, and pots of makeup. It reminded Tony of his secret dresser drawer at home, where he kept his most treasured items. "It's beautiful," Tony said softly, momentarily forgetting himself. Sherry glanced at him in surprise. "Thank you. Being surrounded by pretty things makes me happy." She went to the closet and took out a long garment bag. Laying it gently on the bed, she drew down the zipper to reveal a vision in white satin and lace. Tony caught his breath, moving closer to the dress. It had a fitted bodice completely covered in intricate embroidery and beading. The full skirt fell in glistening folds, the train trailing nearly 3 feet behind. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Tony breathed. He reached out a hand, stopping just short of touching the delicate material. "I wore it for my wedding last spring," Sherry said. "I loved it so much, but don't have any reason to keep it. I'd like it to go to someone who will treasure it as much as I did." She carefully lifted the dress from the garment bag. "Why don't you try it on? I want to be sure it fits before you decide if you'd like to purchase it." Tony's throat went dry. This was the moment he'd been both longing for and dreading. He had never directly admitted his desires to a stranger before, but he couldn't stand the thought of leaving without at least feeling the gown against his skin. "Actually," he began haltingly, "I'm interested in the dress for myself. I enjoy wearing women's clothing sometimes." He held his breath, afraid to meet Cherie's eyes. Instead of judgment or disgust, Cherie's expression held gentle understanding. "I see. Well, please feel free to try it on. I'll help you with the buttons and such in the back." Tony exhaled in relief and gratitude. This woman, who was essentially a stranger, was willing to accept this part of himself that so many others had recoiled from. Sherry helped Tony into the crinoline petticoat meant to hold the dress's full shape. The satin and tulle layers swished luxuriously around his legs. Next came the gown itself, as Sherry carefully guided it over Tony's head. He slid his arms through the capped sleeves, feeling the inner corset cinch his waist. Turning to look in the mirror, Tony's breath caught. The dress seemed made for him, hugging his slender frame in all the right places. Tony stood in front of the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing himself in the wedding dress. The satin fabric hugged his body, and the veil cascaded down his back like a waterfall. He ran his hands over the beaded bodice and swished the full skirt back and forth, completely enthralled. "It's beautiful," he breathed. Sherry smiled, pleased to see him so happy. "You look gorgeous, Tony, like it was made for you." Tony blushed at the compliment. No one had ever called him gorgeous before. "Do you really think so?" he asked shyly. Absolutely, Sherry said. I think every girl dreams of a dress that makes her feel like a princess on her wedding day, and that's exactly how you look right now. Tony grinned, blinking back tears of joy. After a lifetime of hiding this part of himself, it felt unbelievable to not only be wearing a wedding dress, but to have someone appreciate it too. Sherry stepped forward and adjusted the veil, her fingers lightly brushing against Tony's neck. He shivered at her touch. Have you ever worn makeup before? She asked. Tony shook his head. No, never. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. Makeup felt like the final frontier, even more taboo than the silky panties and skirts he secretly wore at home. Cherie tilted her head thoughtfully. Well, if you're up for it, I think some makeup would really complete the look. Tony's pulse quickened. This kind and beautiful woman was offering to share her world with him, to help his inner femininity blossom. The thought was intoxicating. I'd love that, he said softly. Sherry took his hand and led him over to her ornate vanity, its surface cluttered with perfume bottles, jewelry boxes, and makeup brushes. She had him sit down on the tufted velvet stool while she stood beside him, sorting through her stash. Now, let's see, she mused. I think a nice pink lipstick would look great on you, and just a touch of mascara to make your eyes pop. She held up several products to Tony's face, visualizing the colors against his skin. He watched in the mirror, heart pounding as she assembled an arsenal of makeup. Close your eyes, Sherry whispered. Tony obeyed, letting his eyelids flutter shut. Her fingers grazed his cheeks as she applied foundation, blending it down his neck and along his jawline. He could smell her flowery perfume mixing with the powdery scent of the makeup. Next, Sherry swept a brush over his eyelids, dusting on eyeshadow. Look up for me. Tony pointed his face toward the ceiling, and she lined his eyes with a soft brown pencil, smudging it at the edges. Okay, now look straight ahead. Sherry leaned in close, batting his lashes with the mascara wand. Tony held perfectly still, intoxicated by her nearness. Finally, she filled in his lips with the promised pink lipstick, topping it off with a shiny gloss. Take a look, she said, handing him a small mirror. Tony gasped when he saw his reflection. The makeup was understated, but utterly transformed him. His eyes looked huge and doll-like, framed with long, dark lashes. His skin glowed flawlessly smooth, and his lips shimmered with feminine pinkness. I look so pretty, he said in wonder. You look beautiful, Sherry affirmed. On impulse, Tony turned and threw his arms around her. Thank you, he said against her hair, for everything. Sherry hugged him back tightly. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shiny with tears. It's nice to be able to share this part of myself with someone, she said. My ex-boyfriend never understood my love of makeup and dresses. He wanted me to dress and act like his idea of a normal woman. Tony nodded. I know exactly what you mean. I've always felt like I had to keep this side of myself a secret. He hesitated, then continued softly. I've never had a real relationship because of it. I was always too scared she would find out about me and leave. Sherry touched his arm gently. Well, now you've found someone who embraces all of you. Tony's heart lifted at her words. For the first time, a romantic connection felt possible instead of out of reach. Sherry glanced at the clock on her wall. Hey, it's almost dinner time. Why don't you stay and join me? I'd love to chat more. I'd like that, Tony said. The thought of spending more time with this kindred spirit thrilled him. Wonderful. Just give me a few minutes to throw something together. While Sherry busied herself in the kitchen, Tony looked around the bedroom, taking in the details. The lace-trimmed lampshades, silver-backed hairbrushes, and perfume bottles all enchanted him. He wished he could make his own bedroom this soft and feminine. When Sherry called him, he carefully shuffled to the kitchen in the wedding dress, the long skirt swishing around his legs. She had set 2 places at the small table with cloth napkins and lit candles. Champagne to celebrate? She offered, holding up a bottle. That would be amazing, said Tony. The champagne bubbles tickled his nose, and he felt giddy from it all. The dress, the makeover, the company. For the first time in forever, he felt free to be himself. Over bowls of steaming chicken noodle soup, Tony and Sherry opened up about their lives. Sherry told him about growing up with 3 brothers and always envying their freedom. How in college she'd finally felt able to express her femininity through vintage dresses and makeup. "My mother wanted me to be a certain way, very traditional," she explained. "So it's been nice discovering who I am beyond that." Tony told her about his strict, sports-obsessed father who had been appalled to catch young Tony playing dress-up in his mother's closet. "He yelled and told me boys don't do that, so I learned to hide that side of myself." "But you shouldn't have to hide," said Sherry, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Everyone should be free to embrace all aspects of themselves." Tony smiled, interlacing his fingers with hers. "I wish I'd met you years ago. It would have made things so much easier." After dinner, Sherry excitedly led Tony back upstairs. "I want you to try on some of my other dresses," she said. "We wear the same size, so I think they'll fit you perfectly." She brought out dress after dress for him to try on, flirty 50s-style swing dresses with full circle skirts and petticoats, slinky off-the-shoulder cocktail dresses, vibrantly colored maxis with bohemian prints. Tony fell in love with each one. "Walk around the room, get the full effect." Sherry giggled as Tony promenaded around pretending to be a model on a catwalk. The swishing skirts and petticoats made him feel gorgeous. Tony did a dramatic spin to make the dress flare out. After parading around in half a dozen dresses, Tony collapsed onto the bed, out of breath from laughing. "This is the most fun I've had in my life." Sherry flopped down next to him. "Me too, it's so freeing to just embrace our feminine side." She rolled onto her side, propping up her head with one hand. "You know, I could give you a makeover whenever you want. We could have girls' nights in." Tony's heart swelled at the offer. "I would love that, though I'd need to shave my legs first," he added with a chuckle. "Ooh, yes," Sherry exclaimed. Sherry led Tony into the bathroom. She explained the importance of using shaving cream and a sharp razor and demonstrated how to make long, smooth strokes. Tony followed her instructions carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he held the razor. Once Tony had finished shaving, Sherry handed him a fluffy towel to dry off. "Now for the fun part," she exclaimed. "Perfume." She opened a bottle of her favorite scent, a floral blend of jasmine and rose. "Close your eyes and take a deep breath," she instructed. Tony inhaled the fragrant aroma, his eyes fluttering shut. "Oh, it's so beautiful," he murmured. Sherry dabbed a little of the perfume behind his ears and on his wrists. "There, now you're officially a princess," she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Tony looked at himself in the mirror, his legs smooth and his skin glowing from the perfume. He couldn't believe how different he felt. For the first time in his life, he was embracing every part of himself, and it was exhilarating. "Thank you, Sherry," he said softly. "This means so much to me." Sherry smiled, her heart swelling with affection for Tony. "You're welcome, sweetheart. I'm glad I could help you feel more comfortable in your own skin." They spent the rest of the evening chatting and laughing, Tony trying on more dresses, and Sherry showing him how to apply makeup in different ways. By the time the sun began to set, Tony was a completely different person, confident, happy, and proud of who he was. Tony looked up at her, eyes shining. "Sherry, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me today. You've given me so much more than just clothes. You've given me confidence, shown me kindness." His voice trailed off as a single tear trailed down his made-up cheek. Sherry sat down beside him and put her arm around his corseted waist. "It's been my pleasure, honey. I'm just so glad we found each other." She gently dabbed the tear from Tony's face with a tissue, careful not to smudge his mascara. "But I want to do more for you than just play dress-up," Sherry continued. "I want to help you find someone special, someone you can share this side of yourself with." Tony tensed slightly. "I don't know, Sherry. I've never been able to tell any woman about this before. I wouldn't even know where to begin to look for someone so understanding." "Well, you told me," Sherry said. And I think you'll find more supportive women out there than you realize. In fact, I'm part of a local cross-dressing support group that meets a few times a month. Why don't you come to the next meeting with me, just to check it out and meet some new people?" Tony hesitated. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers and announcing his deepest secret made his stomach churn with anxiety. But Sherry's kindness had already coaxed him further out of his shell in one evening than he had ventured in years. He owed it to himself and to her to take this next step. "Okay," he heard himself say softly. "I'll go with you." Sherry's face lit up. "Wonderful. Oh, we'll have so much fun getting you ready for your first meeting. Now, let's find you some shoes." Over the next week leading up to the meeting, Tony could think of little else. His mind churned with questions and doubts. What if he didn't fit in there either? What if the others judged or rejected him? But he trusted Sherry, and her reassurances helped calm his nerves. The afternoon of the meeting, Sherry arrived at Tony's apartment laden with various feminine accoutrements. "I come bearing gifts," she sang out as Tony opened the door. He ushered her inside, heart pounding. For the next 2 hours, Tony surrendered himself to Sherry's primping and pampering. She helped him step into a knee-length A-line skirt and paired it with a silky floral top. After applying his makeup, she pulled his growing hair back into a low ponytail and secured it with a ribbon. Slipping his feet into a pair of low kitten heels, Tony admired his reflection as Sherry beamed. "Oh, honey, you look gorgeous. Are you ready for your big debut?" Tony took a deep breath and nodded, exhilarated and petrified all at once. Arm in arm, he and Sherry made their way downstairs to her car. The meeting was held in a community center on the outskirts of town. As they walked from the parking lot, Tony clutched Sherry's hand tightly. His wobbly legs felt unsure in the unfamiliar heels. Inside, they followed signs directing them downstairs to a large recreation room. Round tables were scattered around a central open area with chairs lined up against the walls. A refreshment table held an assortment of cookies, fruit, and punch. About 15 or 20 people mingled about. Tony was relieved to see a fairly even mix of men and women, dressed in everything from casual jeans and t-shirts to colorful dresses and skirts. Everyone seemed friendly and at ease. Sherry led Tony over to meet the group's organizer, Amanda. The petite middle-aged woman greeted them warmly. "So glad you could join us tonight. Please help yourself to refreshments and make yourselves comfortable." Clutching a cup of punch, Tony followed Sherry to a table near the back. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the incredible variety around him. Seeing so many embracing their feminine side with confidence and pride stirred something in Tony's chest. For the first time, he felt he was among those who would understand. As more people arrived, Amanda called the meeting to order and invited everyone to introduce themselves. Tony stood on shaky legs to give his name, voice barely above a whisper. A round of friendly smiles and hellos lifted his spirits. The next hour passed in a blur of thoughtful discussion and shared stories. Tony mostly listened, but the accepting atmosphere soon put him at ease. During a short break, Sherry nudged his arm. "See, I told you this would be great." Tony smiled and nodded, the knot in his stomach unfurling. After the break, Amanda invited participants to share any announcements. A pretty woman with short brown hair and a floral dress stood up. "Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. I just wanted to let you all know about an upcoming formal dance night at Rhapsody's Club next weekend. They're very open to our community, so I hope to see lots of you there." Tony's gaze lingered on Lisa as she sat back down. Something about her genuine warmth and bright smile made his heart skip a beat. As the meeting concluded, Sherry turned to Tony with a twinkle in her eye. "So, what did you think?" "It was wonderful," Tony gushed. "I'm so glad I came. I feel like I can really be myself here. I told you you'd fit right in, and I couldn't help but notice you had your eye on a certain lovely lady." Tony blushed deeply. "Lisa? Well, she does seem really nice." "You should ask her to dance at that club event she mentioned," Sherry said. "I'll help you get an outfit together that will sweep her off her feet." Tony's pulse quickened at the thought. Do you really think she'd say yes?" "Absolutely. You'll never know unless you try. Just be your charming self and see what happens." Tony wavered, then nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The following week was a whirlwind of preparations. Sherry took Tony shopping for the perfect club-worthy ensemble, settling on a sleek black halter dress and strappy heels. The afternoon before the dance, Sherry arrived once more at Tony's apartment for a head-to-toe makeover. "Tonight's the night," she proclaimed, laying out all her beauty tools. She helped Tony into the figure-hugging dress and cinched him into a waist-slimming corset underneath. With expert precision, she lined his eyes in a dramatic winged style and glossed his lips in shimmery rose. Tony examined himself in the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the sultry, confident woman gazing back at him. "I look incredible," he breathed. "This is really happening, isn't it?" Sherry squeezed his shoulders. "You've got this, girl. Lisa's going to be absolutely dazzled." They pulled up outside Rhapsody's just as dusk was falling. Neon lights spelling out the club's name cast a pink glow over the line of people waiting outside. Tony's heart pounded as he stepped carefully from the car, wobbling slightly in the towering heels. Sherry linked her arm through his. "Chin up, shoulders back. You're a queen tonight." Buoyed by her encouragement, Tony strode toward the entrance with newfound poise. Inside, Rhapsody's was all flashing lights, pulsing music, and gyrating bodies. Drag queens strutted across the stage to raucous cheers. Tony glanced around, overwhelmed, until he spotted Lisa waving at him from across the room. She looked radiant in a shimmery halter top and mini skirt. "You came," she said, beaming as Tony approached. "And you look absolutely gorgeous." Tony grinned, thrilled she had recognized him. "So do you. Would you like to dance?" "I'd love to." Lisa led him out onto the crowded dance floor just as the DJ segued into an upbeat pop song. Lisa swayed and shimmied to the music. Tony moved tentatively at first, then closed his eyes and allowed the thumping beat to move through him. As the song came to an end, Lisa pulled Tony close, their bodies pressed together. She looked into his eyes, her own shining with desire. "I've been wanting to do this all night," she whispered. Without another word, Lisa tilted her head and pressed her mouth against Tony's. He responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her. The music around them faded away, leaving only the sound of their hearts pounding in their ears. Thanks for watching. The rest won't be viewable on YouTube, so check out Patreon if you want more.